I think we all realize that in so many ways we live in a crazy world. You know, that's a statement that is almost self-evident. You almost don't have to prove it. And people even joke about it, you know, and make movies and things. It's a mad, mad world. And they, you know, it's as though people just realize that there's so much that is crazy, so much that is insane in the world around us. And we see that in a lot of different ways. Well, it's not only that the world seems in many ways and many times to be somewhat crazy, to be somewhat insane, to have this type of approach, but in reality, Satan has launched an attack on sanity, on sound-mindedness. There's never been a time of such an upsurge in all types of mental disturbances, of psychoses and neuroses and various types of problems, everything from phobias to alcohol and other type of chemical abuse, to all kinds of problems that are associated with mental and emotional disorders. Satan has clearly launched an attack in this society on sound-mindedness, because not only is this a crazy world, it is a crazy-making world. There's a lot in this world to drive you to the brink, and sometimes kind of push you over the brink. You know, I think a lot of us have sometimes felt that we have been there's enough going on to drive you crazy, and we've even made that statement. I'm sure most of us have. Sometimes we've said it to our kids, "You're driving me crazy." I remember my mother saying that years ago to us. You know, "You boys are driving me crazy." And I suspect that most parents have said that at one time or another, and maybe felt like that. Well, the problems that we're dealing with, the problems that we confront in the world, unfortunately, are more serious than simply that. Now, in terms of Satan's role, we're told in Revelation 9:11, one of the names that we are given for Satan is that he is called Apollyon, or in the Hebrew tongue, Abaddon. That's what we're told there in Revelation 9:11, is he is named, and God names things what they are. It talks about these demons having a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue has his name Apollyon. Now, Abaddon or Apollyon simply means the destroyer. Now, it tells you something about the characteristic, the mentality of Satan the devil. He is the destroyer. And he is out to destroy everything that smacks of soundness, of sound-mindedness, of sanity, of that which is right and good and positive and uplifting and helpful and beneficial. He is not a builder, but a destroyer. His own mind has become perverted and unstable, actually insane, because what is the ultimate insanity? Isn't it to attack God? How insane can you get is to think that somehow you can put together some kind of alliance of created beings following you, these various fallen angels, and attack God in heaven and somehow be able to dethrone Him. Now, to do something like that is really the ultimate insanity. That doesn't make sense. But his own mind became so filled with vanity, so filled with resentment, with bitterness, with hostility, so perverted and distorted in his own perspective that he completely lost touch with reality. That's part of what changed Lucifer into Satan, light-bringer into the destroyer. He became so filled with certain of these things, with vanity, with bitterness, with resentment, with hostility, with all of these things, became so grandiose in his own perspective and so bitter and resentful that he literally lost touch with reality and engaged in the ultimate insanity, which was to launch an attack on God. And he obviously has not gotten any wiser with time. Because we're told in the book of Revelation that he is going to launch such a thing again, and the result is already predicted. God already knows what the result is going to be. He's going to be thrown back down. And when he does, he's going to come down in a rage, and the Great Tribulation is the result. He's going to be bound for 1,000 years. When Christ comes back, when he gets turned loose, guess what? He goes out to stir up trouble again. So, Satan has become perverted. He has become unstable in his mind. He's become, as we're told, perverted in all his ways. And he wants nothing more than to infect our minds with his own irrational, destructive, resentful, fearful, frustrated attitudes. Because he has a certain mindset. And those demon spirits that follow him have that mindset. They have absorbed that mindset. Satan wants nothing more than to infect our minds with his own perspective, which is a distorted perspective. A perspective that is out of touch with reality. Perspective that is irrational, that is destructive, that is resentful, that is fearful, that is frustrated, that is bitter. And he's launched an all-out assault. And we see the results of it in much of the society around. We're told, of course, that in the book of Ephesians it refers to him as the prince of the power of the air. That wicked spirit that even now works the children of obedience. So he is the motivating spirit behind this world. This world takes its cues from the thinking and perspective of Satan the devil. And he certainly launched an all-out attack and an assault on all, and I think most of all an assault on our youth, because they are potentially they have their lives ahead of them, for one thing. They are potentially more vulnerable because they are less set in certain paths of their own. They are more vulnerable to that influence. It's just like a tree as it grows. The younger the tree, the smaller the tree, the more easily bent it is. And you can take a little small sapling about the size of your finger, and you can tie a string to it and pull it over and just almost bend it double. And if you were to keep it bent over like that, it would eventually grow that way. It would harden and grow until it would become that way. The Japanese have made quite an art out of distortion of certain little trees, miniaturizing these trees. Some of the little Japanese gardens, they have developed quite amazing techniques of ways to do this type of thing. Well, the point is that the younger the tree is, the more easily it is bent, the more easily it is distorted and misshapen. And the principle certainly applies with young people, you see, because the older, the more mature someone gets, the more hardened and set they become, either right or wrong. See, that can be either right or wrong. You can be hardened and shaped and set in the wrong way as well as in the right way. It's just the older you get and the more you're set in a certain way, the harder it is to move you out of it. And so Satan knows that the extent to which he can get at all, and particularly at our youth, to influence them and to distort them. These things reflect themselves in many ways. We could go through statistics and we could go through all kinds of things looking at the impact that at the impact that it has. Because God's Spirit is the source, we're told in 2 Timothy 1:7, of power, love, and of a sound mind. God's Spirit is the source of love, power, and sound-mindedness. Now, Satan is the wicked spirit that works in the children of disobedience. Satan is not the source of love, power, and sound-mindedness. There is an attack on that. What I want to focus on today is not so much the attack. I think we recognize that. All we have to do is look at the world around us. What I want to focus on this morning, keep wanting it to be afternoon. I guess if I talk long enough, it soon will be. Won't go that long. What I want to focus on is the fact that there are definite keys that do promote sound-mindedness. God's Spirit is the Spirit of love, power, and sound-mindedness. Satan is the destroyer and certainly seeks to undermine and to destroy sound-mindedness. It's important for us to understand what are these keys. And I'm going to break them down in 7 categories. You could perhaps organize them in other ways. But the first key, as far as promoting sound-mindedness, developing sound-mindedness, is obedience to the law of God. God's law and obedience to the law of God is the starting point for sound-mindedness. Because when you lay aside the law of God, you don't even know what sound-minded is. You have no criteria to discern or distinguish between right and wrong. That's where so many of the psychologists and psychiatrists get off the track. They get off the track before they ever start. They're here to promote sound-mindedness, or that's what they ostensibly are there to. And of course, there are many different schools of thought and many different philosophies, and some have more things that are valid than others do. There are wide variations of opinion and thought among those who have made a study of psychology and psychiatry. But a fundamental problem that interferes with real progress is when you lay aside the law of God, how do you determine right and wrong? Well, normally in psychiatry, they don't use the terms right and wrong. They may use the term normal and abnormal. Now, how do you determine what's normal and what's abnormal? Well, there are different ways. Generally, what they use is what they term a statistical norm or a social norm. They view the idea that a social norm varies with society and it varies with the time. Now, you look around. In other words, how do you figure out what normal is? Well, you look around and see what most people are doing. And if everybody's doing it, it must be normal. Now, there's a problem with that. And I think the problem ought to be self-evident. You see, what's right and wrong does not change. If you're in a society where everybody's doing the wrong thing and you're doing what's right, then you're labeled abnormal. Lot was very abnormal in Sodom. Now, if you were in Sodom and you were a psychologist and you wanted to find out what normal was, and you go around and you interview all the Sodomites, and you finally come to the conclusion that to get married, that would be very abnormal. Sodomy, that would seem to be normal. I mean, everybody was doing it, and how can everybody else be wrong? Well, the source of what's right and wrong is not what everybody else is doing. It's not what society accepts. If you lived in a society where cannibalism was the norm, would that make it right? Is that what these psychologists would think? That'd be good to do because you wouldn't want to be abnormal? Well, chances are they wouldn't say that, particularly if they were going to provide the entree. But, they look around. Really what they want to do is they want to apply it to morality. You see, they like to use these clever phrases that really, if you got down to it, they would not want to apply it literally and say, whatever everybody else does is fine. But it's when you lay aside God as the source and God's law, you have no basis to determine right from wrong. So you determine what's normal. Well, this is the most basic key. Because God's law is a source of sound-mindedness. God is our designer. He is our manufacturer. He's the one who designed and put us together and made us to function in a certain way. And when we lay aside that, when we depart from the manufacturer's instruction book, then we're not going to be functioning as we ought. In Psalm 119, in verse 9, it says, "Wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed thereto, according to your word." How do you clean up your act? The question here was addressed to young people. How is a young man going to know what he ought to do? How is he going to clean up his life? How do you know? You go around and consult all your friends and find out what they're doing? Did they think it's a good idea? Well, that's not the way you get things straightened out. You take heed to God's Word. If you go and you buy a complicated piece of equipment and you want to know how to get it started, how to use it, how to service it, what do? You look in the instructions. When all else fails, read the instructions. And that's what mankind hasn't wanted to do. All else has failed, but they still don't want to read the instructions and see how we're designed to function. And so in verse 97 here of Psalm 119, "Oh, how I love your law. It is my meditation all the day. You, through your commandments, have made me wiser than my enemies, for they are ever with me. I have more understanding than all my teachers, for your testimonies are my meditation. I understand more than the ancients, because I keep your precepts. I have refrained my feet from every evil way, that I might keep your word. I have not departed from your judgments, for you have taught me. How sweet are your words unto my taste, yea, sweeter than honey in my mouth. Through your precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." So here is the principle that if we meditate on the law of God. Now, to meditate means to think about. As we study what God says, then we think about how it applies to life. We think about how it applies to life. And we're to gain understanding, we're to gain insight. That's a source, you see, of learning. How should you go through life? What should you do? What should you not do? Because it's a matter of cause and effect. We're going to eventually reap what we sow. You don't have to wait for the crop to come up to find out if it was, if you planted a food crop or you planted weeds and thistles. God, if all you had to do, if all you could do was look at the seed, you go through and look at the seed, and it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes what different things are. Some of these seeds can look very much alike. They're very tiny. Some seeds are, of course, very obvious when you look at them. They're very distinctive. Others look very similar to other seeds. And sometimes people have wound up sowing one thing in their garden when they thought they were sowing something else, because the seeds looked similar enough, and they planted it, and when it came up, after a while they realized, I planted the wrong thing. And that takes place when that takes place sometimes. Well, God distinguishes it all the way back at the seed stage. See, that's what the law does. It tells us what we're planting. It tells us ahead of time what eventually we will reap if this is what we sow. So it's a source of information. We're told in verse 165 of Psalm 119, great peace have they which love your law, nothing shall offend them. So when we keep the law, it is a source of having peace. It is a source of being at peace. It produces peace. When our mind is stayed on God and God's law and God's principles, it leads to that. Let's notice in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1, verse 24. It talks about here individuals who did not want to retain God in their knowledge. They wanted to forget about God as our society has done. Wherefore God gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their heart, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator. For this cause God gave them up to vile affections. And it describes here the problems of homosexuality which beset much of Greek and Roman society. And it talks about how that ultimately, in the end of verse 27, they received in themselves that recompense of their error, which was fitting. There are consequences that come with wrong lifestyles. And I don't care whether the American School of Psychiatry wants to remove or has removed homosexuality from their list of deviations or things that represent, mental disturbance or emotional disturbance, whether they want to classify it as normal or not. Look around and say, well, so many people are doing it, it must be okay. That has no bearing. You see, there are consequences that are received. There are results. Even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient. A mind devoid of judgment. They lost their perspective. And they became filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who, knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death. They not only do the same, but they have pleasure in them that do. So they're focused in, and their whole life becomes distorted and messed up. The first key to building and developing sound-mindedness is to keep the law. When you keep the law, it'll keep you from the consequences of breaking the law. Second key to building sound-mindedness, something that God gave to promote. See, God gave certain things to promote sound-mindedness. God gave His law. That leads to sound-mindedness. God also instituted the family and a right family structure. Sound families. God gave the family to promote sound-mindedness. We're shaped by our families. The family was designed to nurture, to love, to care for the next generation. God designed that the family would provide that nurture, would provide that love, would provide that caring, secure atmosphere. He talks about in Malachi 2, why does God hate divorce so much? Why one? Why did God make one? there in Malachi 2:14 and 15? The answer is that he might seek a godly seed. God was concerned and is concerned about the family and the integrity of the family unit because it is the basis of perpetuating values from one generation to the next. That's one of the reasons. Why is there so much instruction in the Scriptures about family values? God places a great emphasis on family values. And God places a great emphasis on family values. He's very concerned about that. And many Scriptures, many things that speak out on morality, on sex sins. Why? Why does God place such emphasis on that? Because chastity is the guardian of the family. Chastity guards the integrity of the family unit. And the family unit guards the stability of society and the stability of the next generation. The family shapes the next generation. It is what promotes stability in society and is the basis of shaping the next generation. Chastity guards the family, and the family is at the bedrock of society. It is the basis. It's the most foundational unit. So God lays great emphasis on that because we're greatly affected. Our first contact with love, with caring, with any of these things, the way we learn to interact with other people goes back to our family. We're told in 1 John, speaking of our relationship with God, it says, we love Him because He first loved us. In other words, we learn to love as a response to love that is given. A little child learns to love because his parents love him or her. They pick up that little child, they hold him, they cuddle him, they kiss him, they play with him, they nurture and give affection to that little child. And that is the basis as they demonstrate and display love to that child learns to respond to love. As the parents provide security and stability and love and boundaries and discipline for that child learns to reflect those things. So the family and sound families produce those results. It is one of the things that God has provided to promote sound-mindedness. Now, understand, what is the law guards the family. That's why we start with keeping the law, because if you throw away the law, then you don't have a basis for anything else. The law guards the family. In Satan's attack on sound-mindedness, what has he done? First, he sought to attack the law. He sought to attack the family. These become important concepts. A third point, a third thing that God has given us to promote sound-mindedness is fellowship. Now, you can go all the way back to the book of Genesis when God created Adam. You remember what He said? Adam had spent the afternoon there, that Friday afternoon in the garden, naming the animals. And God said to Adam, it is not good, or He said of Adam, it is not good that the man should be alone. And so God then created a woman, and the two of them gave rise to the human family. But let's just take the first part of that. God said it's not good that the man should be alone. When a person is isolated from others, when a person is isolated from others, now certainly here is the right use, but it has all too frequently been used as a mood-altering substance. Now today there's a whole panorama of chemicals, various drugs that are available, that are mood-altering substances there for the purpose of getting a high out of life. And of course, your big news. They're talking about the penalties, and they're talking about penalties for pushers and death penalty for pushers and this and that. But what we're looking at, there is a vacuum in values. There is a lack of sound-mindedness, and people are reaching out. And they think the solution lies in a bottle. They'll get drunk. That'll solve their problems. Or they'll smoke a joint, or they'll get high on this or get high on that. Or, maybe they'll just mellow out with something. Well, you don't fill a spiritual void with a physical substance. There's an unhealthy dependency that develops there. And in the long run, the problems are compounded. We have 2 booklets on the subject, the one on the subject of alcohol abuse and the other that deals with other types of drug abuse. They go into that, and that's not my primary purpose today, but I think it's something we have to realize, because it's a part of what Satan offers as a solution, which in reality only deepens the lack of sound-mindedness and sobriety. Satan is the destroyer. He's on an all-out attack against that which is right and good and healthy and productive, that which is sane. He's on an attack against what God's Spirit produces, which is the spirit of love, power, and sound-mindedness. Well, God gives us things that can enable us to build and to promote that sound-minded approach to life. And as we utilize God's law, as we focus in on the importance of family and of fellowship, of properly structuring our life, our time, our environment, on being productive, achieving, accomplishing, setting goals, on proper nutrition, on avoiding the substitute chemical solutions that Satan has promulgated in this society. As we focus in, we can be applying tools and keys to build sound-mindedness in an increasingly unsound world.